On this episode of ITAV, how Zoom handled a zero-day exploit, working with different countries and how you compartmentalize each of their security concerns. And Vaddio has developed a new camera for NewTek's NDI system. All that and more. Next on ITAV.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is ITAV, episode 32, recorded Friday, July 19th, 2019. Standards.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by
Extron, industry-leading technology backed by world-class support.
This is the ITAV show, the monthly look at how the IT and the AV industries kind of come together. My name is Tom Albright, I'm your host. With us to discuss the news and information, and good Lord, do we have some doozies for this month. First and foremost, from the great state of Texas by way of Canada, which sounds weird, his name is Justin Kennington, and he is from SDVOE. Welcome, sir.
It sounds weird as my middle name.
Your name is weird. Also with us for the first time, Rob Viren. Rob is from LeGrand and the Vaddio team there. Welcome, sir.
Awesome. Can't wait.
So here's what we got. A couple things that happened in this week, and some of them are security related, and oh boy, do we have a good one. First and foremost, we use Zoom here at AVNation. We just send a commercial. We pay a license. We also use it for our webinars. About a week and a half ago, a story broke that there were some security issues with the Zoom software. Since then, we here at AVNation have been updated both from the software portion. We also happen to use Macs, which is what this story is about, and our Macs also have been updated as well. So here's the short and the of it. Both RingCentral and Zoom had issues in the software, and then the reason for that is RingCentral is apparently a white labeled version of Zoom. There was a security flaw, which Zoom called a feature that allowed some malicious actors, if you had the right backdoor code, to launch a video instance, even if you uninstalled Zoom software. Apple also was working with Zoom to create a fix as well. So both from a Zoom side and them updating their software, also from Apple's side and them doing some tweaks to the OS, they rolled out a fix. Justin, I want to start with you on this. This is one of the biggest kind of hiccups or speed bumps Zoom's run into. They recently went publicly traded back in April, a hugely successful IPO. Is it just part and parcel of them becoming the big 600-pound gorilla that people are starting to look at them more, or is this a sign of a bigger issue?
I don't think it has to be exactly either one of those. Certainly their recent history with an IPO and everything has more eyeballs on them. But what they have here is a serious problem. I don't know that it's reflective of a bigger issue. I think it's, I think it's a mistake. But I don't know that it portends something big and bad going on behind it, if that makes sense. Right? I'm just thinking about all those times that all the snooty Mac users said, we don't have viruses and security flaws for Macs. That's for you Windows losers. And who's laughing now?
Well, there is that, yes. So, Rob, from a kind of a PR standpoint, and looking at Vaddio gear runs on networks, so making sure that those things are secure is of the utmost importance. But taking this and making sure that your customers know that, number one, you're working on it, and number two, that you take it seriously. How do you convey that successfully while also in the background, most likely, running your engineers ragged, saying, we need a fix today?
Yeah, so I think communication is ultimately the most important aspect of this, being clear and active in your communication. Because I've seen a lot of companies make the worst mistake, and that's to try and sweep it under the rug or try to minimize the issue. Companies have a strategic plan for when the eventual bugs or zero-day attacks occur. You have to have a plan for rolling that information out. First to the companies that can address it immediately, and then to the users as quickly as reasonably achievable. And being clear in that communication absolutely critical to keeping trust. And sometimes when you do that and you do that well, you can actually earn trust from an incident as opposed to lose it, which is ironic.
Yeah, absolutely. Justin, Rob mentioned the communication. One of the things that came out of this was a program that Zoom has that's not unlike other software developing and software companies. It's called a bug bounty, right? And different companies have different programs, and a bug bounty in general, and I am generalizing here, is a software company, and honestly a hardware company could do this as well, where they have a stated program by which if a researcher, if a hacker discovers a bug, they will pay for that information, right? So in other words, kind of outsourcing, the hey, come break this type mentality. And I take that and also take a quote from a security researcher and a security expert by the name of Teresa Payton, who said in an interview I did with her once, that said it's not a question of if, it's a question of when you get hacked, right? Somebody's going to find something somewhere, because you're not God, and we all make mistakes, and we're all human. So there's going to be some sort of exploit somebody's going to find somewhere. Take those two together. Is it something where the AV industry and Zoom is kind of, they are part and parcel of our industry. They had a significant booth at InfoComm. Is it something where other manufacturers should take a look at and say, you know what, let's develop a bug bounty program if we don't have one?
I think for anybody operating in sort of let's say the high risk environment of kind of the open web and software installed on every end user's computer, yes, maybe there's less total risk for some of the pure hardware companies in AV, who have devices that are connected to the network. There are vulnerabilities and risks there, but not the millions of users connecting through their own web browser kind of risk that Zoom carries. That said, I thought what was interesting in this story, and I've only just started kind of paying attention to it in the last couple of days, but it seems like didn't Zoom sort of push aside the initial report that came in, right? I thought the idea was that, yes, they had this bounty program, they got this information 3 months ago, and didn't fix it in that time until it became public, and then suddenly it's a scramble, and suddenly the CEO's involved saying, oh yes, of course, we take it very seriously. Like, well, where were you 12 weeks ago?
They did not take it seriously, but their original reaction was, this is a feature. I wasn't joking about the fact that they thought that the bug was a feature. They did work with the researcher who discovered it, and eventually started working before it became public. In other words, this researcher gave them 90 days, which is standard operating procedure. Gave them 90 days to fix the bug before they made it public. And in that 90 days, there was some of that back and forth of, this isn't necessarily a bug or a bug, it's a feature. And then he explained why it was a real bug and a real threat. Then they started working on it. They didn't get the fix done in time, though, before the 90 days was up. And his, to maintain his integrity and his, standard operating procedure, he did release the information kind of before they were fully, they had a fix fully baked.
Well, okay, fair enough if that's how it went down. And certainly I'm sure you've been following it more closely than I have. That's I guess the risk that exists here is sometimes it takes longer to fix something than you want. Yeah. And that's true in any engineering discipline. You try and get it done as fast as you can, and sometimes you don't.
Yeah, I would say part of the core of the problem is actually the go fast and break things attitude that comes out of Silicon Valley. There's not a tremendous amount of respect for these issues. I'd say that, in the past, software absolutely had to be quality because there wasn't really the idea of remote updating the firmware for stuff. When you shipped it out, it had to work perfectly in forever. So, yeah, I mean, right. So you get a floppy disk or, a cartridge video game, the bugs that are in that are bugs forever, right? So I think the art of shipping stuff that is error-free is sort of put to the wayside of the business need of needing to iterate faster and develop faster. And you see some of these more convenience features for the developers roll into some of these software applications because it allows them to be more competitive. So it's the business interest really taking the forefront of that, as opposed to the security or safety or security interest.
That's true, but what I see in parallel to that, the rise of being able to remotely update, allowing us to take risks, is interesting, but also the ability to update is because all these things are connected now. And it's because all these things are connected that some of these risks are much bigger, right? If your old Nintendo game had a bug in it where you hit the guy with the sword and he doesn't die on time, like, well, so what? But now we're talking about webcams being activated, and then and other connectivity bugs about data breaches and things like that. While the ability to update has become much easier, the consequences of failure have become much higher.
Yeah, I completely agree, and go even further to say that even something that seems innocuous, right, like being able to execute, a webcam, is just, these near misses, I call them anyways. Once you start to get the idea that you can execute arbitrary binary programs on somebody else's machine, you don't know what that machine is. That could be something at a hospital. It could be something you don't know what that equipment is attached to. So I think the responsibility should be pushed to these programmers to understand that these could affect lives, not just something arbitrary. Is what I think about, right? So Legrand sells PoE switches. We don't know what that equipment is necessarily attached to, so we have to have a lot of responsibility in thinking that could be attached to something critical. And I think that's an important step to take in sort of maturing as technology becomes more and more interconnected.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next story actually comes to us from from PC Magazine. Billionaire investor Peter Thiel has accused Google of a treasonous act against the U.S. government by working with the Chinese military. A couple years ago, Google stepped away from a project called Project Maven, in which they were helping the U.S. military analyze drone footage for using their AI. And so they stepped away from that. Thiel apparently is accusing Google of working with the Chinese military, and his assertion is that by working with the Chinese military and not with the U.S. government, that in itself is a treasonous act. And he had the ear of the U.S. president, who, of course, took to his favorite medium, which is Twitter, and said that he would take a look at it, which I'm certain that he will pore over the pages and the documents and have full access of his faculties and assess the situation. But that being said, Rob, I'm going to start with you on this. Both of you work for multinational corporations, so let's start with that. Legrand is a publicly traded French company. SDVOE is based in Canada. When you guys start working with folks, and I'm not going to ask either of you to break NDAs or tell me who your customers are, but when you start working with folks, finding that fine line between working with governments or highly sensitive corporations, how do you compartmentalize the different aspects and the different teams that work on this project versus that project?
So interesting you mentioned that, because a couple months ago we saw a robo shot on the desk of the president. So speaking of working with governments, our hardware can be installed in a lot of locations within the Department of Defense and things of that nature. So we take the responsibility of making sure our devices are secure and that they behave in a particular manner very seriously. The way we sort of think about that is really protecting our is important, especially as we send devices international. So we try to make a special effort to have our devices as secure as reasonably achievable, given that once people have access to the physical device, all goes out the window. There's nothing you can necessarily do to stop yourself against a motivated attacker once they have your device. Vulnerabilities will be found if they're motivated enough. So rather than trying to prevent, forever them accessing that information, sometimes just making it obscure is a good idea, or just strategizing around the fact that it's going to occur, So if you don't want a system to be able to do something, you simply make it so, right? So if you don't want somebody to be able to remote turn off your PoE switch, disable that. Render the system incapable of doing that so somebody can't do that. It's really strategizing against the idea that attacks will occur, your data will get lost, and your actual property will be stolen. Now what do we do?
Justin, same kind of question. I mentioned the fact that SDVOE is based in Canada, so obviously you have the Canadian government to concern yourself with, but you also have other nations to deal with. How do you compartmentalize that when you're dealing with different customers who are in different countries?
Well, I suppose I have the luxury of not operating at the level of SDVOE serving big military projects or government-sponsored special editions of our products, as we're talking about in this Google case here. For SDVOE as an alliance, the compartmentalization comes through that structure, right? Each of our members is still their own company with still their own interests and their own secrets. Some of which they may share with me, but many of which they don't, and many of which they certainly don't share with the other members of the alliance who may be competitors. So for us, the structure helps protect that. And if one of our members is working on a project with government X and another is working on a project with government Y or military Z, then there's not a lot of crossover, even through their participation in the alliance.
All right, very good. All right, our last story here comes to us from Innovate on the Net, and the story is about Legrand and Vaddio, and Vaddio is one of the supporters of AVNation. Vaddio has released the newest RoboShot, which is on the new tech NDI system. Real quickly from the article, Vaddio has partnered its RoboShot 30E PTZ with the new tech NDI technology, allowing video systems to automatically detect and communicate with one another over IP, enabling video workflows across Ethernet networks. I want to point this out here. This new tech, if you're not familiar, makes a pretty slick and has for about 15, 16 years, a pretty slick switcher. It's what it is. It's a video switcher. It's a production switcher. And when they first came out, I actually used one of the first generations and used them for many years, both in the education world and also in the house of worship. It's a good product. It's a really good product, and it has evolved over the last 15, 16 years to do this whole NDI thing. And if you're not familiar with it, so imagine a production switcher that will intake Ethernet, video over IP, and use it. You can use it for PTZ. You can use it for the video signal. And folks are kind of evolving and developing products, which is obviously what Vaddio's done here. Rob, I want to ask you a couple of questions about this. First of all, what was the thinking behind going down the new tech NDI path? Sure.
So I think when you find that many companies are working towards the standard of AV over IP, right? The one way you can make 14 standards into 15 standards is by trying to make another one. So I think the most progressive thing we can do as a manufacturer is to work with as many as we are able to support the customers in getting their experience. So there are advantages and disadvantages to every single technology out there, every single choice. And trying to pick the racehorse is kind of a losing strategy. So we're trying to integrate with as many as we're able to. So we're having our own AV over IP platform. We're working with NDI on their platform. We're working with a couple other vendors to make our flexible platform work into as many AV over IP systems as we can, because that ends up delivering superior results for the customers. Because, I'm not going to make their decisions for them. They're going to have a preference for a specific type for a specific reason. And I want them to have the best, easiest quality stream they're able to have.
All right, very good. You mentioned several different standards. We'll get Justin's 2 cents on this one in a second, because obviously SDVOE is a standard as well. Mm-hmm. When you guys are starting to roll these out, what are some of the areas that you're able to help your customers, getting these on the network and making sure they're properly configured for the NDI, the new tech system?
Sure. One of the advantages we have of being part of Legrand is that they have within Legrand AV Luxel. AVOE switches. So we can optimize our streaming configuration on those switches and be able to give people support for what the optimal packet sizes should be, what the optimal QoS, and we can all get lost in the networking speak, but suffices to say, we're specially advantaged for the fact that we control not only the producer of the stream, not only the cables with cables to go, but also the switches. So we actually provide essentially every single component of the AV over IP system, for the exception of the monitor or wherever it's going to, like the laptop. So that's a special advantage we have being part of that corporation, is that we can really provide end-to-end service in that. And really, one of the more complicating factors is the switch in the environment for these systems.
Yeah. Justin, I want to get your 2 cents on this, because this is a new step, at least it has been. Again, Newtek's been developing this NDI for a number of years, but SDVOE has been working and successfully doing AV over IP for, I guess, about 3 or 4 years now. Before that, you're working with a couple of folks before you guys developed SDVOE. This is a new step, though, and correct me if I'm wrong. The broadcast sector is another step in that whole, using the network as the backbone, as the transport. Because when I went to school, when I went to broadcast school, we were still running cables, coax cables, and both SDI and then HDSDI eventually, but we were running that over long distances and this, that, and this kind of replaces that entire thing in much the same way that SDVOE and your competitors are trying to, get rid of the matrix and get rid of those connections here. Is this the same thing, or are these 2 separate, because it's broadcast versus AV, are these 2 separate tracks kind of using, going down the same path?
Yeah, I think broadcast and Pro AV are they look a lot alike from a distance, but they're really quite different when you get into the sort of finer details, right? When you look at the main difference that I like to describe is that the user of a broadcast facility is his or herself a highly trained technical operator, right? Yep. Whereas the user of a Pro AV system is just some salesperson who wants to come in and give a PowerPoint, right? Basically, of course, there's a broad range there, but the point is, these are not individuals trained on operating the system. These are folks who just need to get a job done, right? And then you can get into the technical details of how these things are different as well. But the point is, there's 2. They look a lot alike, but there's 2 different sets of functional requirements for broadcast systems and Pro AV systems. And so to me, what I see is that they're both on this same track, because what's happened is sort of just the fundamental pieces of technology. And I'm talking like how many transistors you can cram into things, and how fast clock rates are, and how fast Ethernet networks are. Those have well gotten to a point now that moving high quality video across Ethernet is possible, and has been for a few years now. So what you see is these 2 different industries that have similarities moving down that same path of, let's go away from our old matrix switches, which were different, SDI switches versus HD-based T switches, and then let's move those into what will be the new standards for Ethernet transport in those 2 different worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it interesting that a lot of folks are looking at both of these, and again, different aspects. And I always find it interesting when folks that we deal with here are in separate and different, move in different circles, because you have Vaddio, who has been in broadcast, but also does a considerable amount of their customer base are also AV integrators. I find it interesting how when folks start moving in different circles and watching and seeing how what they learn and what they bring to those circles, but also what they take away and are able to develop back in the AV space. So interesting. It'll be interesting to watch. So, all right, guys, that's going to do it for us. Mr. Justin Kennington from SDVOE, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tim. Good to be here.
And how do people get a hold of you or SDVOE?
You can find us at sdvoe.org or on Twitter at SDVOE, or find us on LinkedIn, the SDVOE Alliance.
Rob Byron, thank you, sir. How do people get a hold of you or Legrand or Vaddio?
Thank you so much. So that would be legrandav.com or vaddio.com. And of course, we're all over LinkedIn and a bunch of other places. And myself, Rob Byron, I also on LinkedIn. So
That'll work. For me, for Tim Albright, don't follow me on the Twitters, but go by the website if you would, please. AVNation.tv. That's AVNation.tv. You'll find this program and a host of others, including our 2 weeklies that look at different aspects of the AV industry. One's AV Week, looks at the news of the commercial AV industry, AV sector, and Resi Week that looks at the residential and home AV sector. Also, while you're there, check out our supporter section. These are the folks who help us financially, help us bring you IT, AV, and AV Week, and so much more. Vaddio is one of those. We thank them for their support. So all that and more at AVNation.tv. It's AVNation.tv. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. That's all the time we have for IT AV.
I can only see Justin's first name, so I don't know his last name.
He doesn't have one. He just goes by, it's just Justin.
The artist formerly known as Justin. Now I just go by this unpronounceable symbol.
I think he's just Justin. That's a name.
I like that. You know, in certain cultures, that stands for hope.